Yeah, thanks everyone for coming along and welcome to my presentation on what track designers can learn from maintenance. So there's a bit of a caveat. I know some people in the room who have design and maintenance experience, Daniel. So this is based on my experience and it's not NetWell's official opinion or anything like that. And it will be different from other people's experience. Okay, so go on. First technical problem. Dear. Let's try doing this again. This might be a very, very short presentation after all.
Can I live the whole thing with you?
I will just make it up.
Click on the slide, Louise.
Yeah, that's what I've just done. That should now work if you. Yeah.
Perfect, brilliant. Okay, so quick introduction. So I'll run through sort of my CV and experience to date before going on to discuss some basic principles of design versus maintenance, bit about alignment design, bit about S&C design, how we plan works and operating the track in hot weather, a little bit on drainage and minor civils before wrapping up at the end. Okay, so quick summary of my CV to date. So I started in the railway in 2009. So I worked for design consultancy Arup, and that was for 7 years before joining Network Rail. So been a track designer for about 14 years, but of those 14 years, I think 1 year was a level crossing ground plan designer and 1 year on site in Northern Ireland, sort of learning a bit more about the construction side. So 12 years of design. And then in 2023, I joined the regional engineers team. That was with sort of drainage and off track before I started a 7-month secondment as track maintenance engineer at Darlington. And then last summer, I rejoined the regional engineers team, looking a bit more at extreme heat and then track. Okay, so some of the key factors to balance. So in design, sort of the trinity is always cost, time and quality. But in maintenance, it's more sort of asset condition, access and resources. And by resources, it's number of staff, competence of staff, and how much money you've got. So if you've got a small team, but you can afford contractors, brilliant. And a lot of the points that I'll be discussing further on in my presentation will relate to making things a little bit easier in one or more of these 3 main segments. Okay, so starting off with plain line design, so Kant design. So first of all, it's worth looking at if you do get to go to site, or if you've now got access to sort of video footage from your desktop, it's worth looking at the rails that you're going to be designing and seeing if there's any signs that they are incorrectly canted. So this image here is actually from my site placement in Northern Ireland, and you can see some quite severe lipping. So this was through a station. The track was canted for the line speed, but actually every train stopped there. So all the weight was on the low rail, causing these defects. So the design should look at that and go, right, okay, what should we be doing here? Should we reinstate the same cant or going for something slightly different? Another important thing to get right is cant transitions. So at the bottom, this is an extract from I think it's 1987 drawing of York Station. So quite old. This was actually renewed a couple of years ago, but it was in traffic for sort of the alignment was in traffic for a good sort of 30 to 32 years-ish. So whatever you design, that could be in traffic for an awful long time. So it needs to be right. And at this location, you can see the cant on this curve of 45 mil, and on the other side of the other next curve, it's 60 mil. So an instantaneous grade change or instantaneous cant change of 15 mil, which kind of explains quite a bit actually. The existing tracks through York Station, York North, were always sort of flexing between 40 and 60, and that was causing a few issues. And now we know why. So there we go. Be careful of what you design. Okay, so a little bit about tamping. So this extract here is a little bit blurry, but this is of the down main at Tollerton Junction, so just north of York. So the cyan line here, the dashed, that was the existing alignment before it was tamped. So it was a little bit of a roller coaster, and there were lots of problems with voiding, etc. Partly due to the poor drainage, but also the alignment wasn't helping. So the high output track designers sort of came up with a nice smooth design, sort of skimmed over the dips and sort of joined the humps together. So far so good, brilliant. There was a little bit of a tricky thing on site. So you can see the bottom right, that's a photo on site. So the sleepers are lifted almost out of the ballast. So one of the sort of the breakdown in communications, or the misunderstanding, if you like, between design and maintenance was that when maintenance hear tamp, they think maintenance tamping limits. So plus 10 mil, plus 15 mil, small values. Whereas obviously the design, I think, had much larger lifts in order to smooth out the design. But it wasn't, that wasn't communicated quite to the TME. So TME thought it was well ballasted, all ready for a tamp. And actually we ended up lifting the sleepers half out the ballast. So if you are doing a tamping design for maintenance, it's worth trying to put something on your drawing or something to communicate or calculate how much ballast you think will be required. So this at this location, I think it was I'm not sure it's the first ever quad tamp in the country, but it was very unusual to have a quad tamp. And it had been a bit more ballast, I think it would have been just like perfect. But yeah, also it's worth looking at when you are doing a tamping design, just looking at the quality of the ballast. So at Northallerton, which is part of my old patch, the ballast is quite rounded in places. It's a little bit life expired. And we did a tamp through there, and it didn't last. 6 to 8 weeks later, the track quality dropped down again. So just think, if you want a tamp and you want it to last, the ballast has to be in good condition. Otherwise, the track quality is just not going to hold. Another thing is what is being removed from site. So no one's going to recognise this drawing. It's cattle, actually, if anyone's interested. So basically, it's an extract of a drawing, sort of show what designers produce. So the green dashed lines are rails to be removed, and it's worth thinking, can they be reused elsewhere? So at cattle in particular, the existing rails were £98 flat bottom rail. Getting hold of that is an absolute nightmare. It's quite a rare rail type, and yet a lot of it is on the network. So if you have a rail defect, what you do, you come along, chop in, lift out that old bit of rail with a defect in, put a new rail in, weld it, stress it, or plate it up. So if you have something like £98 rail, you want to be able to keep it so you can sort of chop it to length and put it in the track for rail defects. There's a bit of a missed opportunity at cattle. And you might think this is a bit of a contractor decision, but actually, as designers, you're involved in the very early stages of the project. So it's a brilliant opportunity to flag some of these issues. And it means that the contractor's more likely to be able to sort of include it in their construction methodology, allow enough time so that they can cut the rails to sort of usable lengths or sensible lengths. So maintenance can go along and reuse them out on the same patch. So it's a good one. Moving a little bit more into S&C design, so avoiding one of a kinds. So at a lot of junctions, you have a variety of different switch sizes, crossing sizes. If these can be standardized, you need fewer strategic spares. And as I learned, actually, one of the main benefits of like having fewer strategic spares is actually around the storage. So it may seem like common sense, but actually they're massive and they're really heavy, all the spare switches and crossings. And you want to have them near to where you'll install them in track. So bottom right shows putting a switch, storing in the forefoot. So it's brilliant. It's near to site, fantastic. The downside is that you can't tamp through there. And if you want to drop ballast, well, that's not a good idea because you'll damage your switches. So you've got to box in. And if you need to do any lift and packing or any digging out wet beds, no, you can't. So downside of that. And then the alternative is to store it at a sort of a yard. So on the right is the Green Lane Yard, just north of Darlington. You can see all the plant and the very shiny new sidings from the Darlington Station project. So again, we had an incident where we had a crossing, our street spare was stored right next to the fence line, so we couldn't actually get to it. So we managed to get hold of Darlington project team and they moved from their plant out of the way and we got it. But we actually lined up the off-track team to go in through the bottom gate, lift a palisade fence, get the crossing, take it aside and put the palisade fence back. Like storing these things is actually quite complicated. And also if you store it at a yard, there's a possibility of theft. I mean, you think it'd be quite hard to steal, but it has been done. And then I put sort of the cheaper option to have fewer spares. So this is sort of less of an issue for a DU than I sort of initially thought. So the way the finances work for the DU is you only pay for a crossing when it's actually put into track. So you can order it 2 years in advance, and the DU doesn't come off the DU's budget until it goes into track. Obviously, Network Rail do pay for it at some point because no one's going to gift them a crossing for 2 years without paying for it. But in terms of the DU finances, it's actually not so much of a consideration. It's also important to remember sort of timeframes for ordering crossings. So this used to be sort of 3 to 4 months for a standard crossing, sort of 6 months-ish plus for a more bespoke. These timeframes, they're not quite doubled, but they're heading that direction. It's actually a bit of a concern in terms of getting hold of the spares you need. So there's Whitemore, which is sort of almost like the national stockpile, but it is causing problems on various routes if you can't get hold of a spare. And also, when you do your inspections of crossings, if you have say you've only got CV13s, there's a chance the tech team will become really familiar with some of the key important dimensions of CV13, and they'll find it a bit easier to fill in their inspection forms. At the moment, some of these forms are really tricky, so there might be a possibility. But it's not always possible to get rid of your one of a kind. So this is 884 points. This is at Northallerton. Any guesses what makes this unique on the Darlington patch? If you sort of, it's hard to, huh? I mean, you're right. This is, yeah. And imagine you're inspecting this in the cold, in the dark, in the rain, which is more typical weather for Northallerton. It's 2-leveled. So this should be fitted. It's been ordered. It hasn't been fitted yet. But if you do have a one of a kind, mark it up on site. So when you hand back a project to the route team, obviously they're all aware of it. You hand it back to the TME and the team at the time, they're all aware of it. But people move on. You get staff turnover, and some of this knowledge is lost. And even if you do sort of vaguely remember this one's 2-leveled, when you're doing a survey, sort of Saturday night, 3 AM, it's raining, it might not be sort of top of your mind to be like, how thick are those base plates? So having it like signposted, made really clear, makes it a lot easier for maintenance to do the right thing. This is a standard plate design, but actually, if you have any sort of bespoke or unique features, I don't really see the harm in ordering a plate, sort of more bespoke plate. It's not going to cost the earth, and if it avoids a mistake, that could be well worth it. Okay, so a bit more about junction design. So this, firstly, I think designers should be sort of willing and able to sort of challenge the scope. If you can rationalise the layout, brilliant. So the fewer assets there are in track, the fewer there are to maintain, fewer to inspect. And the DU doesn't get any funding or anything like that for having extra assets. So if you can get rid of them, that's brilliant. Also consider sleeper type and railway. So if it is a 56 layout, can you go for something a bit heavier like an L60 Mark II? It will mean it will last a lot longer, whole life costs. It's a good move in that respect. Is drainage in the scope? So drainage is incredibly important to track quality, and it has been historically a little bit of a neglected asset. But if it's not in the scope, should it be? Are there any signs, like is there any wet beds? Is there any sort of flooding in the cess? Is anything that suggests that maybe drainage would be beneficial here? And are there any other nearby features that could result in a compromised design or additional maintenance burden, such as any reduced clearances, so less than normal, or poorly sited IRJs? And it's also worth thinking a little bit about the common maintenance activities at S&C. Some of it's fairly standard stuff like replacing insulators, pads and clips, replacing switches and crossings, a bit of a bigger job, same as replacing cracked or damaged bearers. So the layout you design, how easy is it for maintenance to undertake those activities? So on the right is a picture of Templehurst Junction, and it's a sort of a classic example of something that's really hard to maintain in terms of replacing bearers. So the fact it's on a bridge in the first place means you've got that stiffness transition, which is not great anyway. But given where the sort of the bridge is, you can't slide the bearers out to replace them. So normally you'd unclip, you dig out the shoulder and you slide the bearer so it's sort of perpendicular to the track and pop in a new one. And it's probably do it on a midweek night with a fairly small team. With Templehurst, you have to unclip a lot of bearers, remove a lot of ballast, rotate the bearers so it's like parallel to the tracks, lift out and put a new one in. And it requires a bigger team Saturday night, and there's only so many Saturday nights in the year, which is why we're getting a little bit of cracking on these bearers, and it's much harder to do anything about it. So just think about the ongoing maintenance and junctions you design. And we have my favourite junction, North Allerton East. So it's a bit of a case study in terms of what you could do if you were given a junction like this to design. So this is an NR56B layout. It's got a double junction, including a fixed diamond on timber. There is pretty poor drainage in the area. It sort of sits at a low spot on the landscape, so water does sort of just drain towards the railway. It's got poorly located IRJ, so you can't really see if you, but you've got some offset in the S&C, so they're one bed apart. You've also got them on the fronts. And further to the sort of up the page, there is a plain line crossover, but the crossing nose is still on track, so you've got a discontinuity there, extra forces, causing poor track quality. Got nearby level crossings, and you've got steep vertical gradients of the Len 2 lines, which are the two on the right, that sort of shoot up the bank. You can see from this photo, you've got the LLPs, which are sort of ones on the left-hand side, they pass over at grade level crossing, and then twos are on that bridge in the background. So the grades are pretty steep. So what could you do in this area? So first of all, I was like, well, can it be an NR60 Mark II layout on concretes? And it was yes to the concretes, but no to the NR60 Mark II. So it's got a higher amount of power needed to move it. So it's not practical for this location. So it's like, fine, fair enough. I think when it comes to doing the survey, it'd be very good to undertake a drainage survey, see if there's any sort of capex works that can be done, any block pipes, anything like that. In terms of the IRJs, so the ones within the S&C, they are within the gift of the designer. So when you've got two IRJs, after time on traffic, they start deteriorating, they start moving a little bit, but avoiding. If they're one bed apart, you get a risk of a twist. So by having them in line, the same bed, you sort of don't have that risk. So that is within the gift of the designer. So whoever's doing this one, please do that. And also having the IRJs and stock fronts means if you have to replace them, it's a lot more work in terms of replacing switches. So I spoke to a sort of friendly civil designer who's sort of advised actually you probably could move those IRJs off the switch fronts. So moving it 18208 or standard panel, the operational delay will be about a second. So again, that's actually not too bad. I thought it'd be worse, to be honest. It's quite a complex area for signaling because you've got your junction, you've got level crossings. But yeah, an operational delay of 1 second seems like a small price to pay, really. And also asked the route team if they could network change out the plain line crossover. So that is still in NESA until it's network changed out. So although obviously no trains are actually going to use that at all, it's remaining there. So initially when it's plain lined, there was an objection to network change. They did try, I think it was between 5 and 10 years ago, it was rejected. They tried again, and I spoke to the route team, I think a week or two ago, and it sounds like it's progressing well, no objections this time. So hopefully they'll be able to sort of take out that nose and plain line it. In terms of the level crossings, you're not going to close them, you're not going to try either, and you can't do much about the steep gradients. You've got an overbridge, 2 level crossings, an underbridge, you're quite constrained vertically. So I hope this sort of gives a bit of an idea of a bit of a case study. You can challenge some things and some things will work and some won't, but it's worth even a few couple of improvements will make it better. And sometimes that's all you can do is making it a little bit better. You're never going to fix all of the problems on the railway. Okay, so the next thing to sort of consider is access. So section 5, how easy is it to get access to your track to maintain it? So on the right, this is down passenger loop, just south of Darlington. And you can see the signal gantry is right at the bottom of the image and the turnout's right at the top. So that means that entire stretch there, in order to get in there and maintain it, so it's spot re-sleepering, put new clips in, whatever, you need a possession of the down main. The down main is incredibly hard to get hold of. If you do have a possession of the down main, you'll be working on it. You don't necessarily want to be working on the siding. So the condition of that part of the siding is an awful lot worse than sort of to the south of that signal. And if as a designer, you could maybe change that a little bit, move the signal, it may not be possible, but you can try. That would make that section much easier to maintain. So around the corner from this is the DSN 1 line. So it is in brilliant condition because it's easy to get access to. So you get longer amount of time to work. So you set your boards up, that's an hour. You take your boards down at the end of the shift, that's another hour. But you've got a decent amount of time to do work on it. And as a result, it's in much better condition. It makes a massive difference. So consider that. And also think about what your golden assets are. So this is Hull Station, if anyone recognises that schematic. Everything that uses Hull Station has to pass through those scissors, and they have to be bulletproof. If you lose them, you lose the entire station. So if you are designing an asset which has a critical impact on the operations, you need to make sure that it is good. So you fight for the NR60 Mark II, because that will make a huge difference. Yeah, we like Hull, really. We don't want to shut down the station. Okay, so next is a little bit about critical rail temperature factors. So this is something that I'm sort of aware of as a designer, but I didn't have much to do with on a day-to-day basis. But some of the things you can impact are things like full depth flat bottomed S&C on timber. That has to go on the CRT register. And I think most routes are renewing all their timber S&C on in high speed tracks. So that's probably a good one. So that helps the CRT. Curve location. So this is more about the horizontal. So if you have any curves less than 500 meters, you need to know where the rail joints are and the lengths are. So if you have anything which is less than 300 with rails in excess of 30 meters, you'd like to get a buckle. So the bottom right is the only buckle we had on Eastern Region last year. There's Mitre Bridge. It had low ballast, and frustratingly, the ballast train was booked and cancelled the week before due to finance. So it's a bit of a bugger, really. But also it had the rails were in excess of 30 meters. So it might have just been last summer wasn't particularly hot. I don't think it was, but I think it's going to become more as we get better at managing CRT risk sites. There are going to be more buckles at locations where it's a multiple factors. So the ballast level by itself, it's low, but it's not so low you'd be massively, a little bit worried, but not really worried. It has to have another risk factor to make it sort of in the buckle area. So that will be more important coming forward. And also another thing, level crossings, we're avoiding sleepers at present. So yeah, if you're doing any level crossing ground plans, if you can just renew the formation, the rails, that'd be absolutely brilliant, because it is a problem area. And there are lots of other CRT factors if you're that interested. Mod 14 lists them all out. So yeah. A little bit about gauging. So it's fairly common set. I mean, yeah, the classic image of the gauging issue. It got through, didn't it? Just about. Fairly common sense, but if you can design out any locations with less than normal clearances, that's brilliant. Any location which is reduced, better reduced, or foul, suddenly it's got to have a risk assessment that is pretty hefty. It's quite time consuming to fill out. It's a fairly new requirement, came in last year. And if it's high risk, it needs an engagement management plan. And again, it's just more work to put in, and it can require quite a short turnaround. So if it's sort of fluctuating around sort of special reduce and foul, and it goes foul, then the TME's got to respond within 2 weeks. And sod's law is at the busiest time of year when that's really not going to happen. And any foul locations need to have an identified route to compliance. So a lot of the arguments in design, I remember being, well, we're not making it any worse. That's true. If you're not making your clearances any worse, you're right, and you may get sign off on that basis, but you're still leaving maintenance with that risk. And when projects come along, that is usually one of the only opportunities there is to properly make a difference with the clearances. So take the opportunity, try to make it better. Just because it's hard to maintain today doesn't mean you can't make it better going forward, and avoid things like that. A little bit about UTXs. So don't put welds on top of UTXs. So in theory, a competent contractor should be compacting the layers so you don't get movement at track level. But these things happen, like programs get shortened on the night, plant can break down, and you can end up with UTXs going in without the proper compaction. So you get a lot of movement. So this is, you can sort of see the line of the UTX. So if anyone's not familiar with voiding or wet beds, it looks like light grey. It's where the sleepers sort of rub the edges of the ballast, you get a lot of ballast dust. It's sort of white ballast sites. That's where you've got movement. And at this location, we have high vertical acceleration. So it's something we're starting to look into at Eastern, is where you have high vertical acceleration locations. That's where there's a lot of force going into the rail. A lot of force goes into the rail. Ultimately, over time, that will lead to a rail break. So that is one to watch. It's a potential rail break location. So if you've got a weld there, it could go there. A little bit about access walkways. So with the red zone ban, which is pretty much in place across the whole country now, it makes it a lot harder to see your asset under traffic, and you can learn an awful lot about it if you can stand nearby and watch it. So can you design in access walkways if there's space? Where you have bridges, is it possible to have sort of steps and a handrail? So this one on the left, I think that's Goose Pool under bridge. There's a long timber bridge, so a bit of a risky asset. Being able to go in daylight and see a train pass over that, it's incredibly useful. You can see where the train's moving, where it's sort of wiggling, where it's voiding, where it's moving. So it is good. And then on the right, again, North Allerton. So you've got a nice long access track, and it means you can stand opposite the nose, and then you can hear it or see it if it starts to move. So anything you can do like that is brilliant. So particularly around your high risk assets, so S&C, long timbers. And then finally onto sort of drainage design. So again, a bit of neglected asset, but it's becoming more and more important. We're getting very high intensity, short duration rainfall events, and it can cause a lot of problems. So this is Dalton-on-Tees. This is one of the first problems I had to deal with. You can see it's just up and down main, parallel tracks, and you've got a row of catch pits along the up main. You sort of see on the Ava imagery there. So we've also got a drainage ditch which sits outside the railway boundary. And the line of it is roughly shown in that sort of blue arrow. So the ditch sort of approaches the railway, 90-degree bend, and it's sort of unlined. And it's been fine for years. Like there's been never any major problems with it. And then we had a period of very high rainfall, and this happened. So this, just so you know, is a trace. So this is a measure of the track geometry at that location. So it's pretty straight, and that means it's good to track. Any movement on the lines means something's starting to go wrong a little bit. So you can see it's looking fine, actually. So this is November 23. This is mid-December 23, so it's starting to get jumpy. Still not the worst part on the whole up main, but it's noticeable deterioration within a short period of time. And this was towards the end of Jan. So it was near actionable, twists, lots of dip angles, lots of voiding, lots of wet beds, and very poor track quality. So when this came in, we cancelled the upcoming Saturday night's works and did this instead. So we had to act pretty quick, and it had gone off that quickly due to that, as we then found out a drainage problem. So sent off track to go and have a look, do lift some catch pits, see what's going on. And it's good. So we'll go back. And they lifted the lids. It was a blue sunny day, very, very rare in Darlington in January. And water was pouring in on the side of the catch pit. So the water had just found its way through the formation. So it passed under the down main, not really affected the down main, that was fine, but it was the up main that was really going off. And that was, yeah, pretty bad really. But looking at that image before where you had like twin track, liner catch pits, that's what you'd expect for good drainage design. And to be fair, until that moment in time, I'm sure it performed perfectly well. So it's something to think about in terms of what you've designed up to date. Is that's pretty fine for now, but in 5, 10, 50 years in the future, what conditions will you have to design for? So with drainage, you're going to have a lot more in terms of a lot more volume of water in a short period of time. And in track, well, the way things are going, hotter temperatures, we're also having quite a large increase in the volume of traffic. So EMG TPA will go up, tonnage will go up, possibly some speeds will go up. So the track's going to have to withstand a lot more. So what can you do as designers to help it do that? Okay, and that concludes the presentation. It's quite a short one. Basically, I've said a few things that may seem like designers aren't doing anything to help maintenance, but they are. And ultimately, if you're giving them a renewed asset, that's going to be much better than what they've got already. So they'll be happy about that. But there are a few things that designers can do to make a more maintainable track asset. So alignment design. So just consider the impact of cant on rail defects and the importance of communicating how much ballast you'll need when undertaking a tamp. Press and C design. So the challenges of having sort of one of a kind and how you can just sort of think about some of the assets at the junction to make them more maintainable. Bit about planning, work and operating in hot weather. So understanding how easy it is to access your asset and maintain it, and what features to design out to reduce the risk of a buckle in hot weather. And for drainage and minor civils, again, it's sort of helping to inspect the asset and traffic, and just consider the impact of climate change. And if you forget all of that, the only thing you remember is, as designers, if you can challenge the scope and challenge the contractor in a sort of constructive way. So I've worked with many designers over the years, and they've all had really good ideas, and you need that to come through. You've got these brilliant ideas, they have to be communicated to Network Rail, otherwise they won't be implemented. So but in a constructive way. Like, your job is not to fix the entire railway, but you can definitely make a difference and set some assets, and you've done a good job if you've done that. So yeah. Thanks for listening. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise. That was absolutely fantastic. In a way, I'm really glad that you answered through that, and my brain is absolutely buzzing, as I'm sure everyone else is here. But in a way, I'm quite glad, because I have a suspicion there's going to be quite a bit of discussion off that. I know that there's already been some questions popping up online, actually, so it might be worth popping the Teams chat up just to see what's popping up, to see. Maybe we'll address some of those first before we go to the room. But yeah, my brain's buzzing. What was really nice there is about empowerment, is that designers should feel empowered. Like, ultimately, the railway isn't getting changed if the design is submitted, and designers therefore have quite a lot of power, and they can use that, as you say, constructively to solve quite a lot of problems. This was, for the gauging issue from the picture, the train grazed the structure. Is there no gauging train or template which can be run following maintenance works to avoid such scenarios? I mean, come back in 5 weeks' time, and we can get D-Gauge to talk about that whole process. But yeah, Louise, I don't know if you want to pick up on any specifics around the maintenance story around your managing gauging a bit more.
Yeah, so in terms of I think in sort of 10, 20 years ago, or from when before my time, unfortunately, and there did used to be sort of these templates. I remember hearing about sort of the underground train with polystyrene on it, which they pushed through the tunnel to see if it fit. I think nowadays it's we undertake surveys, so point cloud survey is probably one of the better ones. But basically you do laser sweeps of the structure, gauge it, improve its clear, and hopefully you'll all be designing with normal clearance, so that will not happen.
Do your maintenance teams have do the DU have laser sweeps routinely? Do they have their own laser sweeps? So if they've done something, they can go out and check.
The only surveys I saw were sort of datum plate surveys and platform gauge surveys. So I think there are some DUs which do have more surveying equipment, but it's very different across all the different routes and DUs. There is quite a range in competence and skill sets regarding surveying.
So again, the right thing for the designers to do, if you've got a sticky structure that's high risk or even medium risk, is get green blocks, is specify green block data plates. The DU might not have a laser sweep, but they have the tools to ensure the track is compliant with the green block datum plate. So that's I remember having interesting back and forth conversations about whether I was allowed to specify green block data plates and what the battle was. And I was like, no, this is a problem structure, and the maintainer has no way of knowing that it's a problem structure. At least put something like datum plates in so they know. Yeah, that's interesting. Any further questions online? If not,
can I just
oh yeah, go on.
A designer is required to design to normal clearances.
Yeah.
Anyway, otherwise then it has to provide a derogation, in which case all the mitigation. Slight development on the comment about allow sufficient clearances. How much extra should you allow over and above minimum 100 millimeters? Because that is applicable. So for instance, adding installation tolerance so you provide 115 mil clearance in your design, so you guarantee you get at least 100, those sort of things. Yeah. But again, you're back to specifying what client wants. So I'm going to jump ahead actually to my, I'm going to be naughty, that's my question.
Unbelievable. Go on, Jeff.
Everything you said there, Louise, is valid, but a big chunk of that is it needs to be specified, as opposed to waiting for a designer to come back and say, well, actually, it's rubbish having this turn out here, shouldn't we move it somewhere else? It's usually either too late, or they are not empowered to be able to make that comment. And also designers, the way designs are procured, nobody's paid to do 3 or 4 designs to work out what's the best solution, but we'll do one and try and do it quickly. So again, you pay peanuts, pay peanuts getting is what I say about that the wrong way around. But you know what I mean, if you don't pay for the right job, you don't get a decent product.
And that's only got worse over the 10 years. I mean, you'll have certainly seen it in your consulting career, but in my, the 10 years that I've been doing it, that got worse, measurably worse. Like when I started, we had the breathing space to do a bit of iteration play. We do not have that now. particularly CP7, you know, with consultants dropping staff left, right, and centre, no one's spending money on iterating a design. You get the design that works and then you run with it. And if it's compliant, then that's the story. It's like, well, you don't need to create a perfect design. If that design fits the bill, then we're pushing that design out. And that's, again, that's client led.
What does fit the bill mean, Kenneth?
Fits the spec, meets the standard, job done.
Yeah, so minimum.
I agree. It's a bit like MVP, isn't it? It's like, well, what's viable? What do you mean by viable? But unfortunately, in a world where there is less and less enhancement work and consultants and designers are getting more, you know, their bosses rather are getting more and more desperate, then we're going to get more and more junk designs.
But in a world with less enhancement work, it means it's even more important we do renewals
Absolutely.
diligently. And how does a designer have from the start input from how is this going to be built? How is it going to be maintained? And how is it going to be operated? How is that knowledge feeding in at the beginning? And how is it fed in throughout the process?
And
Sorry, the question, because I'm way
No,
out of
no,
touch, way out of touch.
I think, yeah, so scopes tend to be very much like I want a rewell from here to here. There we go. It can literally be sort of almost like a 1-line item. Same with S&C, like you're doing this junction, minimum renewal limits, go ahead, crack on. I think it's like the route teams, they're not big. You've got maybe less than 10 people looking after the entirety of a route which spans a massive area. They don't have the size to come up with really, really detailed scopes, and they do their best, but the numbers just don't add up. And as a designer, although yes, you do have sort of tight budgets, timeframes, you'll spend an awful lot of time looking at that design and that thinking about that, possibly more so than people speccing it. So you're in a unique position to suggest improvements.
But how is the designer, unless they've got maintenance knowledge or have actually installed something, how are they taking that into account in their design?
That's a
Or
tricky
who's
one.
providing that input?
well, they should all be PWI members and they should be attending and watching these sessions because good grief. Well, there's frankly, like I learned, you know, there is so little process for designers these days to learn anything. Like there's just no process for them to learn anything. I know all the consultants here who are, you know, colleagues, former colleagues, and it's so difficult for the new engineers who are coming in to have a chance to pick up and learn this stuff, other than particularly nowadays when everyone's working from home. I learned everything I know from being sat next to a more senior engineer and listening in on what they were doing and whizzing my chair around and asking, what are you doing with that? Why do you do that? Those conversations are even harder now that everyone's working from home. That's not just the fault of the new engineers. It's also because the well-off senior engineers with the big nice houses stay at home as well. So that's a challenge, right? But also we are encouraging our engineers to not be troublemakers. Engineers need to be troublemakers. They need to push the bosses who are going, the internally within consultants, the consultancies going, you know, the project managers applying pressure on cost, and they're always doing that because that's their job. Then we need to be pricing as consultants. We need to ensure that we are pricing in the ability to iterate a good design, not an acceptable design. So I think it falls a lot to the design consultancies. We can't blame the client for not giving us a good spec. Because design consultants need to challenge that pot.
Can I counter that?
You absolutely can.
If we build that in as a consultant, we
You
won't
lose the
do
job. Yeah.
We just won't win the job.
PBH nick office, right?
So, but a follow-up related question, if I may, I've got the floor. Louise, you said you want the designers to come to you to ask what the problems are, and I go, you know, back quite a few years to when I was a young graduate, and I worked on a rolling stock depot, and new trains were coming in, and the old guys were saying, why didn't they come and ask us what the problems were? They're just repeating the same errors of, you know, train sets, in that case, 30 years before. It's the same here. As a designer, with restricted with access we have to people, you know, our own project managers and the Network Rail project managers are saying, just deliver, you know, you've got to deliver yesterday, not tomorrow. Is there anything we can do more constructively to enable you as a track maintenance engineer, in this particular case, to say, right, we know we've got renewals here, but existing problems in this area are, taking North Alliston as your example, we've got wet bays here, we've got drainage problems there, those points we think are in the wrong place, we've got IRJs in the wrong place. How can we actually bring those right back into the scope, rather than waiting for the contractor to be on board, suddenly then to be saying, well, I can do all that, but it's going to be change, it's going to be delay. And so it comes back to a certain extent to Gareth's point, you know, we're under all these pressures throughout the industry that somehow we need to try and see if we can feed that in from a track maintenance engineer. When you know that something's going to be coming up, flag it sooner in the process.
Don't get rid of project engineers.
I mean, that would be one. Yeah, that would be one.
Back to specifying the project or having the proper feasibility stage and understanding what you want before you engage the designer.
And you'd be a lively discussion. I'm glad that you came to spending time to have it. There's actually some stuff. So I realised that we didn't actually address Paul's point. What do you think, Louise, to that?
So in terms of knowing what the problems are, you can try asking the TME, but generally they're busy. They do not always respond to emails. You can try calling them, bit iffy. But now we've got access to things such as like the video footage stuff. So you can almost sort of like drive through and you can see the wet beds, you can see that information. You can request stuff like the trace in the area. So I don't know, I'm not sure why they'd object to giving you that information. About the defect history. So we have access to all these registers, all this information internally. But I suppose people don't know that it's there, so why would they ask for it? But I think it's knowing what kind of work has happened in the last 3 years at that location. Are people repeatedly going back to the IRJ to lift and pack it? Well, that's a problem, isn't it? But unless you have access to that work bank, you're not going to see that information. And project engineers.
So just to elaborate a little bit on my brief point. So there isn't really a good reason why proactively designers can't get in contact with those people. And having kind of put in all of these camps, if somebody rang me and was asking me about how they could do the best job on my asset, I would find time to speak to that person. But I find that a lot of designers seem uncomfortable picking up the phone and making those calls into people like maintenance, and traditionally, therefore, the link has been project engineers who picking up the phone is a key part of their role, but in seemingly losing a lot of project engineering, that link of somebody who will happily speak to the team, and the industry haven't joined those people up directly.
The process sometimes breaks down. So I do design CRE. It'll be, if you want to speak to the maintenance engineer, you've got to go through PA. And you might not know who is that person, who you got to contact. Stuff gets tied up in a lot of red tape. It's the same with the information that's available. All this information that's available is hidden behind RFIs, or if you want paper, you've got to pay for it and stuff. And I get all that. Make stuff easier to get hold of, so you're not having to RFI for a load of information at the start of the project. It's just there. It's in a portal or whatever. Like you can get access to sexual appendix. Stuff is hidden behind stuff so easily. It makes it awkward to get hold of.
There's a couple of pertinent points in the chat that I want to scroll back through and pick up. In reference to that, one of the things as a railway we need to be better at doing is being comfortable airing our dirty laundry in public a little bit. Like, what are the problems? And therefore, the designer can just get the list of problems and go, oh, you've got these problems. Okay, how? I'm saying this as someone who's been CRE. I desperately want to chat to the team to work out all the problems I got in the area so that I could go, well, okay, I can probably do something about a couple of those. But as I say, TME, very difficult to get to. We've got asset management systems that have a lot of this information pretty well recorded by this point now. Actually, having for designers to have access to those would be extremely interesting and useful.
But they need to know what they're looking at and how to use it. And unless they have maintenance experience, lots of information can be unhelpful.
And again, I don't want to paint the PWI flag, but Louise, as a committee member, I think the two of us would both say, well, it's all about making sure they are paying close attention to their professional institutions, because this is the forum for this discussion to happen and for those people to become empowered with knowledge as well as being a rapscallion. Louise, do you want to scroll back? There are a couple of good things. If you want to pick up a couple of the questions there's a couple that have come in that,
Here we go.
So Gage one, response to that.
Yeah.
Colin's question there.
So what does maintenance do when it comes to having to tamp over a vulnerable structure? Got a structural person here, so they'll point me in the right direction.
Depends how many big signs we've put up going.
Don't tamp there. So it probably will be a banned tamping site. We have a few of them, some for vulnerable structures. We also have some under, I think, when OLE limits there's some locations where OLE is at its limit. I think there were some sort of jumping bands there as well. Yeah, it has to be discussed with the relevant civils route team.
Yeah, so we have that conversation ultimately. So it's an example on East Midlands where we put up big signs saying camping is not permitted over this structure. We got phone call quite quickly. And we ironed out the problems. Because actually it wasn't all of the structure, there were some very specific bits about which we were concerned. And having, and from that slightly controversial side has come an excellent working relationship with the TME. And we chat on a regular basis about what, how we solve particular problems. Even get advice on weekends these days.
That is another.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. More night shifts than we used to.
Yeah.
And the point they're being brought up again by Colin about traces and designers having access to traces. If we ask them, we can eventually get them. But no,
Yeah, so I think I did see his comment further down the chat. So our traces are now, here we go. Network Rail's recently launched B2B access rights to systems like, we call it insights, where you can see trace information. So if that's available to people in the supply chain, that's incredibly useful. So it's basically the trace information, and it's got historical ones, so you can overlay the two and see where you've got movement, where things have changed. I think it's got a few other things in there as well, plus like rail defects and closed work bank items. So again, that might give you a bit of a feel for how intense that area is to look after.
Brian's asked a really interesting question, which I like. Hello, Brian. Brian Parkinson asking, do Network Rail provide performance specifications or the solution specification? I quite like that. So I suppose what Brian's driving at is, do they say, you know, renew this S&C, rip up this plane line, or do they say, we've got these issues and we want to see these outcomes? Designer, what do you think we should do? I know the answer to it, but Louise, what are your thoughts on that theme, if not the specific answer?
Yeah, so at the moment, it's very much sort of solution specifications. I think performance would be an interesting one. It depends on what your performance metrics are. So again, we are in line speed, it can change sometimes, but for the most part, it's fairly it's not going to change massively. One thing that is changing is the timetable and the tonnage. So I think it was the last timetable change. I think there was an additional 34 trains per hour south of York and 17 north of York. There might be things one just gone and possibly one coming up, but there's the general trend is we're getting a hell of a lot more trains running. So how can you, what kind of performance are you specifying? If your EMGTPA is doubled from sort of like 20 to 40, and that's within a short time frame, do you know what's going to happen in 3 or 5 years time, 10 years time? Because this asset is meant to be lasting that long, but I'm not always convinced we know what tonnage we should be designing for over its lifespan. It just seems to be going up an awful lot every year.
Ben.
I'm going to take us in a different direction, a less technical direction. As a largely office-based designer, how did you find life as a TME responsible for the piece of the East Coast Main Line 24/7? First part of the question. Second part of the question: how did the team respond to you as a designer and as a woman, I guess? Not as I guess, as a coming in to be the TME and running the section, running the area.
Okay, so I think initially, sort of looking at taking on the section of the East Coast Main Line high speed, it was pretty exciting, really. It's very high pressure job. You're doing something different every single day. There's an awful lot to learn. I really enjoyed it, and possibly that's because I fully didn't appreciate some of the worst parts of the patch until later on. But it was really good. In terms of how the team accepted me, I was a little bit nervous, more about being a designer without previous maintenance experience. Like the normal path TME is not designer TME. But actually they were really good. It's quite a solid team, so they're functioning quite well. So that gave me a bit of breathing space to get up to speed on some of the things, and I learned an awful lot from them. And there's a couple of things that I could do a bit not better, but I could sort of bring to the table in that respect. So I was, in terms of reviewing the forms and processing things, I was much more, I was happier with that. I knew what knew I could do clear it too, so I could do some gauging, that sort of solved a few issues. And just relied on their expertise. When I, for like rail defects, I'm still not particularly brilliant at rail management, but you rely on your rail management engineer for that and your team who are experts in that. And yeah, I think I'm not sure whether I was expecting being a female engineer going into that space, but actually it did not have a problem at all. Like, didn't feel like I was never made to feel different for that. So that was, yeah, really, really nice. And they were a lovely bunch. So
I guess the follow-on question is, how do we encourage more
cross movement,
across
yeah.
the boundary between maintenance and projects and design?
I think that's a tricky one. So in DUs, it's fairly common to have grads on placements. So they are used to a certain extent of taking on people for up to a certain period of time. But you're busy doing things. You can't take someone for a week and have them follow you around. You need to have them for long enough that you can get them up to speed and get them to helping you out with certain things. So I think a placement would be useful, but then would your substantive role be happy with you going and sort of just for personal development and learning experience? So there's definitely some things that design can help with, but it's trying to make that business case a little bit.
How would you facilitate that? The staff doing it internally in network.
That sounds like a great pub conversation for later, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than one for now. You're absolutely right. It's an industry problem we've got to fix.
The bit I was great because the grads would spend time in the design office, spend time out on site, end up in PWI somewhere before moving on. And they got, fair enough, some bits of it were fairly small and short experience, but they did get the broad experience of everything where you would learn.
It's a two-way street, isn't it? Because it goes the other way. I'm certain of people who worked in maintenance for their entire career who would maybe 6 months, 12 months in a design office, seeing some of the challenges that designers face would completely change the perspective and help
them specify projects better.
It's the point Joe makes. It's hard enough to do internally. It'd be great at someone who is consultancy based, has always been consultant based. If people on grad schemes can, rather than rotate into a new discipline for a bit or a new area, and go, I'm going to go and work in maintenance or construction or something like that.
Yeah. I think
got it back in the day at BR, I imagine. Yeah.
I think it's an absolutely critical mission that GBR reinstates the ability for anyone who's nominally within the rail industry to come into the organisation on placement with as few strings attached. I think that's a really critical part. And also, yeah, that's my view. I don't know, Louise, whether you having done that.
Willingness of companies to basically not have their staff here and go, well, they're not in that activity, that's the other challenge.
Oh, given that the consultancies are loving seconding out their staff at the moment, I don't know. Consultancies are basically making all their money through seconding staff into Network Rail. So
is Network Rail going to pay for a designer who has no experience in maintenance to go and do some experience in maintenance?
Well, they should. I suppose that's to have a better railway, we need to bite that cost. Louise, I don't know if you've got more expanded thoughts on that.
I think that would be it'd be tricky to pull off, to be honest. Yeah, it's our designer's gonna be happy sort of joining a maintenance team, working lots of nights, out on all weathers, doing tech inspections, yeah, but also sort of shoveling ballast. Like it's yeah, I think it will be an interesting one, but equally I think incredibly valuable experience.
Just gonna say that so I 20 years ago, Ian Kitchen, who a lot of people know in this room, advised me, even though I was as a kind of mentor, to start my career in maintenance, no matter what I ended up doing, because once you're in maintenance, you should be able to do everything else, but not necessarily the other way around. And I described to when we get grads through that my engineering judgment was founded in working in maintenance, but is then applicable to lots of other things.
You've had construction experience in
I think it's the direction of travel I went is sort of design, a little bit of construction, more design, maintenance. That was almost like pushing swimming upstream a little bit. I think it would have been easier to go the other direction, but
it was extremely hard work to get new engineers, new consulting engineers out on track at all, let alone getting any kind of more expansive experience. So I think one of the things that I wanted in my kind of last words that I want to say, and I'm not going to do it now because there's more questions and we've got a little bit more time and I'm keen to pick them up. One of the things is an emerging theme is designers get out there and kick the rails, like just go and walk on track for your design. Like you should not be going anywhere near design, not being out on track where it's happening. And that's become harder and harder to actually make happen in this day and age. But I like CRE should be saying this design stops unless my designer gets out to walk around on track, right? And that's key as a minimum, that's key. But like, you know, I went into heritage railway stuff because there were no places on maintenance. So it's just critical. And again, it's that cross. This is fantastic as a forum, but nothing beats having that, even just being out and understanding what the railway looks like when you stand on it. It's a thing that I don't think all consultants have that experience. Peter, yeah.
Could I take us back to a comment you made a few minutes ago, Louise, about traffic tonnage? The December 2025 timetable is the long delayed recast for the whole of the East Coast Main Line, where traffic tonnage will go up significantly, access will reduce, and this is in the second of two control periods when track renewal budgets have been severely constrained. Now, it would be nice to think, wouldn't it, that, you know, some clever people are sort of joining the dots on that sort of issue, because there have been some cases elsewhere on the network where absolutely foreseeable step-ups in traffic, you know, everybody looked at it, everybody knew about it, but the action wasn't done. So I mean, it's going to put a lot of pressure on maintainers from, well, not many months from now, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't envy them. Yeah, so yeah, the overall age profile of the asset is deteriorating, it's getting older, we're not renewing enough per year. And yes, more tonnage, more traffic. It's also more when things do go wrong, so you have a defect, you've got to put an emergency speed restriction on. That slows trains down, that's a service affecting failure of a staff, there are costs associated with that. We have to balance our budgets. So your enhancement budget, such as it is, will drop to pay for those staffs. You have to balance it. So you're either going to be in a bit of a downward spiral with it, or you're going to be hopefully holding steady or an upward spiral. I think it almost needs a look at, well, you'd like to say more funding, but if that's not available, making a few tough decisions about what you do. So I remember talking to Brian actually a couple of weeks ago when he was I'm not sure what the phrase was, but he was an old money TME. And in his day, it was all about you'd have as many sort of speed restrictions on as you want, as long as it was safe. It was about taking twin track railways. You can't afford to maintain that, you go for single track. And that was his experience, or part of his experience as a track maintenance engineer, or whatever the title was. And it's almost like we need to have a rethink now of what we need to do, what we need to look at, what lines do we accept a higher or lower speeds on. So lower speed is less damage to the track. You can almost like a protective speed. So at the moment, you try and put a speed on, the first thing, you're going to get a call saying, not telling you to take it off, but what are you doing to get it off?
Yeah.
So when are you going to go in and fix that problem so we can get that line back to line speed again? I think there needs to be maybe a bit more of a sensible decision to be made. Like on this stretch of track, we can't renew it. Its next renewal plan is like 5 years down the line. We can't operate it at 125. But if we get at 100, the rate of defects will be lower, be more manageable. Again, very much my opinion, definitely not network rails at the moment. But I think you just need to be a little bit more accepting of, you know what, if your journey time increases by, 125 to 100, the journey time impact, not sure what, over a certain distance, it's not going to be like loads.
Every second on the East Coast Main Line will be worth in excess of £5 million.
Okay, well that's
So it is
that's a lot, but there needs to be, if you can't renew the asset because you haven't got access, the only thing you can do to protect the track is a lower speed or fewer trains, and if it might have to be the lower speed option.
Should we just scroll down at the before we pick up the last couple of questions there, just in case there are a few questions in the chat, because people are, oh crikey, yeah, okay. Some good
agreed.
discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in terms of maintenance tamps to design, so that's definitely a big push on the East Coast. So they're trying. I think they're one of their sort of key measures is how many tamps are done to design. Thanks, Sterling. I had a meeting with them earlier. So removing S&C from the network is ridiculously difficult. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty
no,
network change.
it's a comment more than a question. Thanks, Andy Hibbert. Yeah, that is.
Yeah, so we do have issues with network change, and what often happens, so in sidings, you may have 3 sidings. In actual fact, only one is operational and only one needs to be operational. You don't network change the 2 out, you just ban them to traffic. That's one way around it. If you ban traffic long enough, hopefully in time, people will realise it's not actually necessary. Okay.
2 last questions in the room then, yeah.
If I may, yeah, sorry. And maybe I'll touch a little bit, you can tell from the colour of my hair. But one thing I picked up on from what you say, and I fully agree, you know, it's get all parties together, design, maintenance, project, whatever. But I think the key thing for me that I'd recollect anyway is, and you mentioned the asset team, the specification for the design. So if you refer to, for instance, the IBJs at Northallerton East being on the switch fronts, yes, surely at the time of that renewal becoming on the cards, that's when the specification should look at getting rid of those IBJs, and that's the maintainer and the asset team, is it not? Or to facilitate, and I appreciate fully as an ex PWI and working in maintenance for a long time, pressures on maintainers, it always has, always will be. But they should make time for when a renewal's coming up to be able to sit down with their asset steward, and if the designer can be involved in that, all well and good, but certainly before the design gets on the board, we know that there's a problem here, for example, the IBJs, whatever. You know, that process seems to me to be a key stage where the maintainer has its input at the right point before it gets to, I heard about the iterative designs and appreciate if designs are out of house, then there's a disconnect. And I may say, in all honesty, back in BR days, the designers and the maintainers didn't always connect anyway. So it is a long-standing problem, but I would just say it's key that at that point, the asset team or have the capacity and capability to hear what the maintainer, what his problems are, what can be engineered out, if possible. That's it's probably more of a statement.
No, I totally agree. You do want to hear what the problems are at that location.
Thank you. And a really good talk.
Yeah. There was a question at the front first, and James, if it's a little one, we can sneak it in, but I'm now conscious of time.
So I'm hoping it's going to be a little one. You might have to give some of my ignorance about, but it's more of a process question. So the design is driven by the need for a renewal largely, and in an ideal world, you would have that conversation between the designer and the maintainer. Do you ever come across the situation where if that conversation happens, the maintainer will say, I appreciate you're following a standard of design, but I don't need that, or I don't agree with that, or I would like to go outside what the standard says? And if so, how would you record that conversation? And is it possible in this world?
Is it worth just conscious of it quiet, restating the question for those online, because it's a very good question, an interesting one.
Sorry,
Louise, I just say that if you answer your question by repeating,
broadly speaking, if there is a challenge to the design standard from either the maintainer or the designer, how would you discuss and agree that technical variance? And is there the scope to carry out that pushback so both the designer and the maintainer end up getting what they want, which is not necessarily the same as what's written in the standard?
Yes, I think that's almost where the asset team needs to come in, and the maintainer needs to say, right, yes, I agree. This lesson. You're never going to say no to renewal. To be honest, you're going to say well. It's unlikely to say that you're going to say no to a renewal. But if you say, actually, I'd also like this section of plane 9 has actually caused me problems, or as in the case of Northallerton, this is, I know that crossing is out of scope, but that nose is still in.
Yeah.
But can you do that as well? That's, I think you'd communicate that with the route team and they should be including it in the scope. The only time I sort of semi said no to renewal was, so one of the policies on the East Coast is to renew all your high speed timber layouts. And Northallerton East isn't high speed. But I thought that was a higher priority than some of the things they had in their thing. So I was like, well, I'm prepared to sacrifice that for this. So that's the closest I got to saying no to renewal. And actually they found they were able to sort of, they do scope something else, like some plane line renewal of the loop. So I think they're both being done. But yeah, I think it's also maybe on maintenance. There's a lot of firefighting and maintenance. So you're not always in the headspace of, in 5 years' time, what do I want my asset to look like? You're not in that headspace. So I think one of the longest serving TMEs on the East Coast at the moment is about 8 years. I think it's about to move on to a different role possibly. You're not. Some TMEs are in place for much longer than that, but not all of them. So, and you find you're dealing with this week's problems, next week's problems, the upcoming. So hot summer prep is definitely a thing at the moment, or should have been done by now. But you're not in the headspace to think in 5 years' time, what do I want my asset to look like? You can't. And also you're dealing with keeping the railway, the day-to-day maintenance. You're kind of relying on the route team to be doing their bit in terms of specifying renewals. You answer any questions they have, and you have like regular like called ramp reviews. So you have regular meetings with the route team to discuss that, but you can't take that on too much. You've got your job and you trust them to specify.
Before James picks up the question, cheers, Chris. Mike Rodwell, you had your hand up briefly. Did you want to chip in, or did you have a little query? And then really, no. James's will be the last question.
Yeah, no, it was just because I work on South Rail Systems Alliance, so we do S&C renewal and plain line renewals all over the sort of country. I was just sort of jumping on the back end of that conversation that someone raised in the room. Essentially, obviously, I appreciate maintenance do feed into what we call SSRRDs, which is a site-specific route requirements document. So basically, the regional team will say, I have X between X track is within the renewal scope. And sometimes that is moved about depending on maintenance ability, etc. i.e. what Louise said, they will sacrifice one site because they're more favourable of another. But again, maintenance will generally feed into that. These are the holistic issues that we've got. And then part of the pre-construction information, we would look at all the systems that are available to gather that data and then do the development. We then feed that back to the regional team, and the regional team sign up to that. So that's route level. They're the ones essentially, if we have derogation, they will do the approval because they have delegated authority. I don't think maintenance can actually do anything in terms of standard deviations.
No, we put them to the route team, but I think there's been it depends. As long as your derogation is site specific, that can be signed off by the route. But I think if you're doing something slightly broader than that, it's got to go to head of track.
Yeah, like red clause will definitely go to professional head of track.
Thanks, Mike. Right, last question, and then Ben's got an announcement, and then I'm going to close. That's and then we're off to the
I've got about 4 really quick comments. Comments. Tollerton was an interesting example of level difference issues.
Yes.
The British Railways area used to call the Regional Civil Engineers PWI office, Track Design Office, the Flat Earth Society, because they never produced long sections. Tollerton was the last renewal that was done without a long section.
Okay.
And we moved a crossover to a location where there was a ½ metre level difference between the fast line and the still there, without a long section. You mentioned about £98 rail. I'm not sure many designers would even know that £98 rail exists. After 30 years, it was 30 years of my career. 2 years ago, I first came across a £98 flat ball, and the only twigged it was different when my wear gauge wouldn't fit. Rail. You mentioned the UTX and wells. It was probably designed to have the wells not under the UTX. I would imagine the UTX was just installed in the wrong place, not per the design. And that's it. I've got another 12 questions. But
Ben, please come up. And before I say my final word, Ben, you do the announcement first, and then I'll.
Less of an announcement, more of a reflection on PWI conference today. So I got chatting to Kate Atwell, who's the Chief Operating Officer at PWI, and she reminded me, and actually got me to do a piece to Cameron to talk about the Rail Engineering Institution, Railway Engineering Institution, should I say, which is the proposed new name for the PWI. So the PWI looks to be more progressive and expand beyond that traditional link to the track discipline only, and step into that gap of being the institution for railway engineers. We're going to put a vote to all 4,000 PWI members this summer. That vote has to, by rules governed by Companies House, have a 75% agreement rate in order to change the name of the institution. So I just wanted to register the intended name change with everybody in the room, and also to emphasise the 75% rate required.
And unlike Ben, who's more of a diplomat than I'm going to say, let me strongly advise that we all agree with the name change, because it doesn't mean that we're getting rid of that wonderful legacy. It does not mean that. But it does mean that we're doing something that means that people know what we are. Because the name at the moment is instantly lost when you speak to the public. And we have a much more important public role than we currently pretend, than we currently do. And we need to be more active, and therefore we need a name that people understand. And that is not what our old name is.
However, if you don't agree with Gareth, I'll be in the York Tap for the next hour. If anybody wants to discuss it with me over a pint afterwards.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay.
Yeah, you might hear a bit more about that from me going forwards. If I got a whole question now, if I may.
Can we make sure there's a turnout in the general election?
Yes.
We'll never get
Yeah, well, here's hoping. No, I just want to say, Louise, that's absolutely fantastic. Just so much in there. Just really, really one of the best PWI presentations we've had in a very long time. Really, really good. Just so many key things, like getting people out on track is just such as a basic minimum. Get our design, for design houses, get them out on track. Feel empowered as designers, but just so much that was fantastic. And then Louise, thank you so much. I'm really glad it was short and snappy, because I knew there'd be lots of really good discussion. We will be going to the York Tap. Everyone who's joined us online and from the future as well, excitingly, thank you so much for joining us. I think we had 20 at peak there. I think it was 17, 18, certainly when I looked. The last things I will say is just a reminder of the things coming up, which are 6th of May in Leeds, Bradford Forster Square Platform Zero. That's going to be really good. I'm looking forward to that. And then 15th of May back in here, D-Gauge are going to come and talk about a bit more gauging if you want picture. I bet we all have to drink the moment they put the picture up with the overbridge and the scoured thing, because that picture always comes up in any gauging presentation. So everyone, York Tap, thank you so much. Louise, thank you again. Let's go. Nice one.